Knock on the Saints door. Quarterback sneak by Tom Brady to the 43-year-old score. He did. Touchdown, Tampa Bay. Now spike that ball, Tom Brady. Who says I'm 43? He runs right up the gut and scores 6. 7. Handoff, run the ball. Fournette slashes away to the 40, to the 35, to the 30, to the 30, 25, to the 20. Fournette to the 10, 5, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Tampa Bay. Run the ball, Leonard Fournette. Wow, what a blast up the gut, found daylight, and outran everybody. Fire the cannons, get them going. Bucs win. Bucs win, Bucs win. Fire them cannons.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Swords Up Podcast. Today we're going to be looking at and reacting to our Week 3 win in Denver, 28-10 against the Denver Broncos. And this was another week in which my prediction was really close. I was actually 4 points off our score, and I predicted the opposing team's score correctly again. So it's good to see that I've been fairly close on my predictions. But I'm going to be looking at our team performance this week and looking at just what we did right and the highlights of this game. But first, we always have to start off with the not-so-great news, and that is the injury front. And unfortunately, Chris Godwin sustained another injury in this game, but hopefully he'll be back next week, as it didn't seem like too major of an injury. He suffered a hamstring injury late in the game. He left in the middle of the fourth quarter. Obviously, that was just a precautionary measure to prevent any further damage. The injury was a non-contact injury. He was just running a route, and then he just pulled up and walked off the field grabbing his hamstring, and they took him to the locker room as a precautionary measure. Now, Sean Murphy-Bunting, a little more concerned with him, as he left in the middle of the second quarter with groin and hamstring injuries. So that's going to be a big loss if we are missing him next week. I feel like we're just a bad luck charm for other teams sustaining major injuries to key players. Jurrell Casey in this game suffered a torn bicep and will be out for the season. He is one of their best defensive players. Obviously, they traded him from the Tennessee Titans in this offseason for a 7th-round selection. And they brought him in to shore up their defensive line, and that's a big loss for them, having only played 3 games for the team. Casey now is done for the year. Now, before I look at the key stats and why we won the game, I'm going to be highlighting the man who came back to Denver as our player of the game, obviously, was there for 5 seasons behind Von Miller during his time in Denver. And that, of course, is the NFL sack leader from last year, Shaq Barrett. In his return to Denver, Shaq recorded 6 tackles, 3 for a loss, and 2 sacks, and one of them was for a safety in this game, obviously coming back to bite his former team and showing them why not re-signing him in free agency was a bad decision for them. Now, looking at the team stats from the game, starting out on the Broncos side, the key player that I highlighted in the preview was Jeff Driskel. He completed 17 passes on 30 attempts for 176 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. He was taken out in the middle of the fourth quarter for Brett Rippon, who threw 8 completions on 9 attempts for 53 yards and had an interception. I also highlighted Melvin Gordon. He had a pretty quiet game, due in part to our run defense, which still remains one of the best in the league. He was held to 26 yards on 8 carries, averaging 3.3 yards per carry, so not a very good day for him. Jerry Jeudy was the leading receiver with 55 yards coming on 5 receptions, and Tim Patrick had the lone touchdown in this game for the Broncos. He had 4 catches for 43 yards. Defensively, Justin Simmons was the leading tackler with 8 tackles. Shelby Harris had a great game. He had 2 sacks and 2 tackles for a loss. Bradley Chubb also had a tackle for a loss. He would have had a sack in this game, which would have been his first in over a year, obviously coming off an ACL tear from last year. But it was later ruled a tackle for no gain after it was originally called a sack. So that's about it on the Broncos side. Nothing too impressive from them in this game. On the Buccaneers side of things, Tom Brady had his most prolific day as a passer yet, with 25 completions on 38 attempts for 297 yards and 3 touchdowns and no picks, importantly. Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette were pretty quiet on the ground. Rojo had 13 carries for 53 yards, averaging 4.1 yards per carry. Leonard Fournette only had 7 carries in this game for 15 yards. Scotty Miller put up his best performance of the year with 83 yards receiving, but only on 3 catches. That was a career high in receiving yards in one game for Scotty. Chris Godwin obviously coming back from the concussion he suffered last week with 5 catches for 64 yards and the 1 touchdown, which he scored was the first of the game. Rob Gronkowski, after only having 2 catches in the first 2 games of the season, had 6 catches for 48 yards in this one, and Mike Evans 2 catches, 2 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Defensively, Jamel Dean was the leading tackler with 8. Shaq Barrett, obviously, as I highlighted, as the player of the game with 2 sacks, 3 tackles for a loss. Jordan Whitehead with a sack and a tackle for a loss. Antoine Winfield with a sack and a tackle for a loss. Jason Pierre-Paul had a sack in this game, bringing his total to 3, and now he has a sack in every game this year. Vita Vea also recorded his first sack of the season, and Levante David and Mike Edwards came up with the interceptions. So there's another important play that I also want to look at that I didn't mention on stat sheet, and that was a blocked punt by Patrick O'Connor after the Broncos' first drive of the game, which set up the first touchdown by Chris Godwin and gave us a short field. That was a really important play that really kind of put us out in front and really out ahead of the Broncos before this game could ever really get started. So now that we looked at the individual stats, just looking at 2 key points of why we won. Number 1 was a clean game that we played offensively, and also spreading the ball around. That kind of goes with that. Obviously, Tom Brady didn't throw an interception in this game, and no turnovers is always good when you're an offense trying to find its rhythm. And this week was a week in which, progress was made. It's definitely a step in the right direction. Ever since our loss in week 1, we have been taking those steps forward to where I think we're becoming the team that we're supposed to be and that we're going to be there some point later in the season. And also the second point, which kind of ties in to what I was just mentioning, was our defense carrying us again in this game, obviously holding the Broncos to 10 points. And they've really been the story for 3 games of the season. Obviously, it helps when you have such a great defense like we've had, because it really helps out the offense, which is trying to find its rhythm within many new pieces in it. So yeah, honestly, if it weren't for our defense, I don't think we'd have a winning record at this point in the season, and I'm pretty serious about that. Now, looking at a couple of miscues, obviously there were holding penalties in this game. There are quite a few. I think Donovan Smith had one, Alex Capo as well, and there was another on O.J. Howard, which they didn't call, but they pointed out in the broadcast that he probably should have gotten flagged for a holding penalty on one play, and he didn't. Another error was a blocked extra point, so special teams mistake. Didn't really affect the game too much, but just something to keep note of. And also there was another fumbled handoff in this week. This time it happened to Leonard Fournette. It was basically similar to what happened last week with Ronald Jones, but this week it did not result in a turnover. So yeah, maybe Brady and the running backs do need to work on the handoff exchanges this week in practice. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me this week covering this game. I thoroughly enjoyed the game this week, and I was happy to see our defense perform at a high level again this week. Let me know what you thought about this week's games in the comments below, and I'll be looking forward to the next video coming out, which is going to be the preview to Week 4's game against the Los Angeles Chargers as we come back home. And I think there will be some fans in that game. I think they're supposed to be doing a test run in that game to hopefully have fans later in the season at 20 to 25% capacity. So yeah, hopefully this game goes well with the test run, and that we'll be able to get some fans in this game and hopefully for the rest of the season. But thank you guys for watching, and go Bucs.